Ukrainian-Canadian war veteran from the Second World War who fought the Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, even at his age of 98. He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service.
Hello and welcome to the Resistance Podcast. My name's Emma Dunwell and today I'm joined by investigative journalist Warren Thornton. Hi Warren, it's so nice to finally be able to put a face to the name. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, hello. My name's Warren Thornton. I'm a journalist. I was the gentleman who exposed the Nazi in the Canadian Parliament and got a visit from the police for doing so. I spent 6 years as a military sniper in the British Army, and I spent 8 years looking after people in war-torn areas, aid workers in war-torn countries. So that's basically the sort of stuff I did before I became a journalist.
The main thing that I wanted to talk to you today was the freedom of speech issue that we are having in our country right now. And am I right in thinking that you actually left the country in preempt of all of this happening because you saw where it was going when you knew that Keir Starmer was going to be our next Prime Minister?
Yeah, absolutely. Having the sources I do sort of around the world and around the country, I got a heads up of where the bill was going in the UK and made the decision that if Starmer got in, he'd already laid these plans out for the restriction of your freedoms of speech, having already been, shall we say, interviewed because of exposing the fact that there was a Nazi got a standing ovation in the Canadian Parliament, and then getting a visit from the British police, which I thought was very, very odd. And of course, from there, I decided it would be much better if I located elsewhere in the world because you just saw what was coming down. In fact, some of the stuff they were telling me that was coming down the pipeline hasn't even occurred yet. That just goes to show how bad it is. The blasphemy laws that they were talking about bringing in over a year ago will probably come to fruition as well.
In the actual Houses of Parliament, we've had people asking Starmer directly, are you going to be introducing blasphemy laws? And like a typical politician, he can never seem to give a straight answer. But the general thought is that blasphemy laws are soon going to be implemented. You mentioned having a bit of a brush up with the police. I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind talking us through how severe that was. What exactly did they attempt?
Yeah, it was a very, very strange thing, to be honest. I was in the middle of a podcast. Now, on the Friday, I had, the Thursday evening, which then sort of hit everywhere on the Friday and blew up over the weekend. I exposed the fact through some sources in Whitehall that this gentleman, Yaroslav Hunka, was the guy who got the standing ovation from Trudeau and his Parliament. And I was able to prove that Trudeau and everybody knew exactly who he was, had fought on the side of the Nazis in the World War. And there he was getting a standing ovation in the Canadian Parliament. And of course, everybody knew about him because he was actually a prisoner of war in Great Britain during the Second World War. So it wasn't like everybody didn't know who he was. And of course, his son actually donated vast sums of money from obviously the mining company of that area, which is a global mining company. Actually gave a huge donation to the Speaker of the House, the Canadian House, called Rota. And I exposed this, which eventually caused Rota to resign. But on the Sunday, I was doing my normal podcast, and there was literally, I just popped outside to drop something. I was on with a lady called Fiona Ryan and another guy called Gordon Dimmock and a couple of others, and a reporter from the Donbass. And we were talking about the situation. I just popped outside, literally the police turned up. and said, "Are you Warren Thornton?" I said, "Yes, I am." They said, "We'd like to talk to you about some malinformation that you've been promoting." Now, here's the thing. Disinformation is when you know it to be false and you publish it anyway. Misinformation is you didn't know it was false and you said it anyway. Malinformation is when you are telling the truth, but they rather it wasn't it. They think it could be harmful to go out into the public sphere. Now, as a journalist, I think our job is to tell people when we find things that are either interesting or they're misleading the public. The journalist charter is quite clear on this. If somebody, a person, a corporation, or a body is misleading the public, then the public have a right to know, and that very, very simply. So the next thing was, we'd like you to come along and answer some questions voluntarily. To which I said, I'm in the middle of a show. I don't want to come and answer any questions. And they said, well, then you will be arrested. I suppose. I said, well, in that case, then you will have to arrest me. And of course, I managed to fire off a text, just one word, to somebody who was running the show for me, saying police. And then they took me away for what was 12 hours. Basically, they left me until about 6 o'clock in the morning, at which point I was given my phone call. I wasn't given a phone call before then.
Wow.
And of course, I refused to answer any questions until a solicitor was present. Now, it just happens to be through a cricket colleague of mine. I happen to know a very, very good solicitor who pretty much tied them up in knots. They were going to give me what they would call a caution. And of course, my solicitor turned around and said, he has done nothing wrong. He will not be accepting a caution. You will either charge my client or you will let him go. And then, of course, we quoted various articles of free speech, including some to do with the UN. And of course, the discussion was, if you accept caution, no further charges will be pressed. So, well, if you're going to press charges, press charges. And my solicitor was quite clear on this point: either charge my client or let him go without a stain on his character. And of course, they went out, had a discussion for about 5 minutes, and then decided they came back in and said, you are free to go. At which point my solicitor turned around and said, and the charges? And they said, there are no charges at this time. He said, no, charges relating to this. And they said, well, there's no charges relating to this, but there may be other evidence that we need to look at. So, and of course, they let me go after that. I never heard anything back. In fact, we did put forward a suit for wrongful arrest, but nothing ever came of it. Of course it wouldn't.
Of course it wouldn't. I mean, that's all really, really interesting. And it must be quite terrifying to have that brush up with the law when you would think that the police should be focusing on, violent criminals, theft is rife at the moment. I mean, we all know what they do, or I suppose I should say what they don't do with shoplifters. If it's under £200, it's basically fair game. Now, obviously, the main thing that strikes me about you is that you saw this change coming, and you saw that it was going to be so drastic that you uprooted your life and you moved to another country. Do you think that there is a definitive turning point or event that led us down this road of censorship and everything else?
I think there was a defining moment. I think the moment they finally grabbed Julian Assange, obviously of WikiLeaks. For me, that was the defining moment, because if you could go after somebody who was quite obviously publishing material that they would turn around and say, what again was malinformation. It was perfectly true. It's just the fact that it might cause some government some embarrassment. And of course, once they went after Assange, I think that was the turning point where they turned around and said, well, if we can get him, we can absolutely get anybody. Now, what they then started to do was apply that more broadly across. So it went from, shall we say, official secrets or things that they thought were secret to the trans lobby, for instance. If you were to say anything against the LGBTQ movement, the books appearing in schools or whatever, you could be arrested for hate speech. Anything that was deemed Islamophobic, anything that was deemed anti-Semitic, So it's very, very easy. And what I found through the research was they wouldn't attack you as an individual, but they had to put you in a box. So, for instance, I don't believe in climate change. I don't believe in the vaccines. So there we have a white male over 50, anti-vaxxer, and he's anti the jab. You know, he's an anti-vaxxer and he's anti-climate. He's a climate denier. So immediately they can put you in that box of climate denier, anti-jab, or he's white, therefore he's a racist. Very, very easy to do. And once they put you in that box, they can then attack you as a group rather than attack you as an individual. Because if they're a group coming after you as an individual, it's a lot more, it looks a lot worse. But once they can give you that label, say, for instance, just throw one out there, far right, you can label anything far right that has conservative views. Once you label them far right, they're then a lot easier to attack than if you go after the individual.
Yeah. And this whole thing about the individual versus kind of a group mentality is really interesting, because a lot of our rights to free speech are being taken away in the name of offending certain groups. And then other groups seem totally acceptable to offend. For instance, obviously there's all this hubbub about Islamophobia in Parliament at the moment. They're actually going against what they say their original morals were. And it's a big hypocrisy, don't you think?
Oh, it's massively. There's nothing like the woke for hypocrisy, and in the end, you see, they end up eating themselves because they're very simple. You can't be woke enough. If you actually turn around and you say, "Oh, well, I don't believe in this, and I don't believe in that, and I don't believe in that," and you're supporting them all the way. The moment you veer not far enough in that stance, they'll come after you. They'll say, "Well, you didn't really speak out about." Gay rights, and they go, yeah, well, it's quite obvious I do support gay rights. Yes, but you didn't say it. And then, of course, they turn on you and come after you. And eventually, if you see all these people, the further woke they go, the more problems they have, because they have to keep reinventing the wheel. Because if they don't, eventually the wheel comes for you. Once that wheel stops spinning, if you're standing underneath it, you're in real trouble. Just because you may feel offended, that doesn't mean you're correct. It really doesn't. It means you just got a very thin skin, and you found offence at that. Now, I could turn around and say, I'm offended at you being offended.
Where do you draw the line?
Yeah, exactly that. Where you draw the line is when 5 police officers come round to your house because you may have said some hurty words that offended someone in another country, let alone your own, in another country, and they come round to give you a warning while there are people out there, committing all sorts of crimes, while there are people running riot with machetes in the middle of, seaside towns, attacking each other. And the other thing that I really wanted to address when it comes to Starmer's two-tier policing, did you know, for instance, the amount of people that are being locked up now, when you consider 2.5 year sentence, and of course we had one gentleman kill himself. Now, I'm not saying that you should possibly be a little more circumspect. As a journalist, we have to be very careful with our words. But the thing that is really interesting to note is that while they've been locking up people for the most trivial of posts on Facebook, we've had over 4,222 paedophiles in the last year that have not received a jail sentence for looking at disgusting images of children.
Exactly. I mean, not only have we got people not even being convicted in the first place, and then we've got people being convicted of, hurty words and Facebook crimes, etc. But we've also got the Labour government actually letting violent criminals out. And a lot of it is being done in the name of offence, but a lot of it also is being done in the name of net zero as well. We have a lot of change going in that way. I don't know if you wanted to touch upon your views on that.
Yeah, well, my views on the net zero are very, very simple. We managed to get hold of a government document, and it was a government package and a document that was put together and it showed where they were heading. Now, you may not believe this, but I can actually send you the government slide.
Please
And
do.
it's from a slide. It was from a slide deck of literally 2050 and 2049, where we've got to be in 2049 for 2050, where we've got to be in 2030. Now, cows were always on that agenda. Farms were always on that agenda. Fossil fuels are on that agenda. By 2050, we are not supposed to take any commercial flights whatsoever, and we are not supposed to take any form of shipping whatsoever. In fact, they want to cut down cars to 60% by 2030 and only essential vehicles on the road after that. So basically what they're doing is boxing you in to your own country, literally rail travel. By 2050, the whole idea is that you take rail travel and that's the end of it. And we haven't even touched on all the electricity and everything else and the EV vehicles and everything that goes with that. And of course, it will also, we haven't touched on the financial implications of this, which will completely bankrupt every country.
They're not even bothering trying to hide it anymore.
When they come out with this sort of arrogance and they start attacking, of course, they use it to attack people left, right, and centre. But they hide behind it, and it is a fake shield. I mean, there's no question whatsoever that they will go straight down the tubes with this. This is not something that they can really. What's the word I'm looking for here? It's a straw man, if you know what I mean. It's a terrible argument that cannot possibly stand up to proper scrutiny. I mean, you only have to look at some of the stuff that Starmer's government has done, taking away the winter fuel payments, for instance. Yes, you can take away the winter fuel payments from people, and yet they still collect and they're still claiming their own winter fuel payments themselves. Now, that is indicative of a government that just does not care about the people.
Well, not only that. Sorry, no, carry on. Yeah.
Famously, Starmer turned around and said, when they turned around and said, do you want to be Prime Minister or be working in the World Economic Forum? He said, I can do business in Davos. That tells you, and his very first election pledge, when he came out and addressed the people, was about giving money to Ukraine, not to pensions.
I suppose I just wanted to ask you, do you think that there's any redeemable qualities of any of the current political parties in our country? Do you think there's any way that we could turn it around?
I think the way to do it, and I've long argued this, very, very simply, the big corporations now run government. So either Big Pharma, military industrial complex, and the AIPAC Jewish lobby, all depending on who butters your bread, is exactly, you don't get invited to the party unless you are, shall we say, on the take. If you're not on the take, you're not getting a seat at the table. It's as simple as that. Now, I remember interviewing Andrew Bridgen, and very simply, he was offered, would you believe, when he had the debate on the vaccines and the vaccine injury, the day he was slated to have that debate, he was invited to Davos, would you believe, on the very same day, so that he wouldn't give the interview. Wow. And I spoke to him on this, about the lobbies inside, and he turned around and he said, I have been warned by my Conservative Party before I was kicked out of it, that very simply, you are fighting against forces you've no idea. And you could name, literally, he was asked to name his price that he would want for basically keeping quiet and just having the party line. And the major problem that we have is this, as you were saying there, the dumbing down of people. And there's a wonderful comedian called Bill Hicks many, many years ago who once turned around and said, watch, here you go, America, here's 52 channels of American gladiators. Watch these idiots bang their skulls together. We'll wake you up when it's time to vote. And that's pretty much where we are now, I think.
Doesn't that just encapsulate it perfectly? Because, I mean, there's decision after decision that the Labour Party has made that have just enraged people. And then these sanctions on Russia. I mean, not only was that a bit of a stupid
sanctions
move.
on the UK.
I mean, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, and that actually had an impact on the farmers.
I would absolutely agree with that. Let's unpack the sanctions for a
Yeah,
kick-off.
absolutely.
Those sanctions, basically on trade, they've still been doing deals under the table. They've still been buying from Gazprom, Ukraine, Germany. Everybody's still been buying from Russia, would you believe, underneath the table. And we did an investigative expose on that. And also, the sanctions actually are sanctions against your own people. Now, we get 2% of our natural gas from Russia. And of course, our bills went up through the roof, up to 219%. Can you tell me why in some areas people's bills went up 219% when we only get 2%
Wow.
of our natural resources from Russia? And the other thing that was really, really important to know as well with this is that very simply when it comes to we hear this talk, don't we, about we may have to go in, Britain may have to steadfastly go in and help Ukraine left, right, and centre when it comes to military aid. I would remind Keir Starmer that in the battle for Bakhmut, Ukraine lost 120,000 of their very best troops in 8 months. Now, in the UK, we have 73,000 people in our military. A lot of them are admin and everything else. And we've got about 40,000 that would be of any real use fighting on a front. And therefore, you're looking at maybe 3 months before they're wiped out. And warfare has completely changed.
Yeah.
We keep sending, the Ukrainians weapons. Half the weapons end up on a shipping container and get funneled through Turkey. Some of those have now ended up in Syria. Some of those have ended up in Israel. And of course, the other problem we have is, of course, then a third of that, of course, is Ukrainian. Ukraine is probably the most corrupt country in the world. And of course, half that, a third of that money gets siphoned off. So a third of it actually gets there in weapons, and it doesn't really go to Ukraine. No. What it does is it then goes to American arms companies and Great Britain arms companies, and they send them substandard rubbish that doesn't work on the battlefield.
Defiance Records, bringing you the best music from the movement. Ramisa's Never Give Up and Mad Mix's You're So Right are now available as a AA side on Defiance. And Raw Milk Conspiracy are bringing the purpose back to music with their latest single, This Is England 2024, and their brilliant debut, Misinformation Whore. Plus, now out is the fantastic Ballad of a Toolmaker's Son from Trevor John, all available from Defiance Records, the Freedom label.
Did what he was told to do back then, and that's how he got the number 10.
What is it that really, for you, makes Ukraine the most corrupt country in the world, and why does that overtake the corruption that we've got elsewhere for you?
What you have to remember is that 1/3 of all the aid that was sent. I'll give you an example, for instance. There was the wonderful people of Great Britain got together and they raised all this money for aid, and it wasn't for military aid. It was for goods and services, for bandages and everything else. And they sent 27 train loads. So there are 27 coaches on this train. Only 5 of them actually reached their destination. The rest was all taken and sold off on the black market. Now, that's just a small example. Only 1/3 of the money that has actually gone into Ukraine and 1/3 of the weapons that have gone into Ukraine have actually been used in Ukraine. That should tell you everything that you need to know. When you consider the billions of arms packages that we've sent and what has actually ended up on the battlefield and hasn't ended up on a tanker being sailing to Turkey underneath the guise of it being a grain ship, it is quite incredible. And of course, once it gets into Ukraine, it can then be funneled back out through Romania, and then of course it can depart from there. So the Black Sea is an absolute, should we say, a hotbed of illegal arms trade. Wow. The black market in the Black Sea is quite incredible. I literally could go on the dark web tomorrow and I could buy a weapon. I could buy an automatic rifle in Ukraine for around 5,000 English pounds.
Wow.
I could do that tomorrow.
So basically, from what I can gather, then any money to Ukraine is essentially money down the drain.
It's a completely black hole, and this is, how can I put this as gently as possible to your listeners? Ukraine is an unwinnable war. It's always been an unwinnable war. I said exactly what would happen, has turned out. And of course, right at the start, was totally decried and called a Putin apologist. You are talking about a country that is on a war footing in Russia that have more men, they have better equipment, they can produce it faster, they have more people to throw at it. Which part of that war do you think you are going to win? And not only that, they're fighting it on their own doorstep, and it's always much more difficult logistically. And the other thing that you have to remember with this as well, that the Ukraine, the propaganda machine that fuels this is enormous, absolutely enormous. And of course, everybody was saying Ukraine are winning. Ukraine have never been winning. They've been losing men at a rate of about anywhere between 10 to 1 to 12 to 1.
Wow.
Now, as a smaller country, that is completely unsustainable. And they're talking about Ukraine needing more people. Well, apparently, according to Zelensky, they've only lost 30,000 troops or 70,000 troops, as he likes to say. If you've only lost that amount of troops, how are you struggling to get people in there? And of course, we've all seen the videos of them beating people up and throwing them onto the front line. There are 200,000 people have surrendered. Through my contacts on both sides of the fence, we find there are 1.2 million dead and there are 600,000 injured. 200,000 have actually surrendered, and over 250,000 have deserted.
That's just absolutely staggering numbers. I mean, it's almost unbelievable, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you think that the best thing for our country then to do would be just to not get involved, kind of pull out and just let Russia and Ukraine handle it themselves, get on with it?
Well, let's put it this way. In 1990, Edward Shevardnadze, Baker, who was then the foreign secretary, and Mikhail Gorbachev got together, and I have the documented piece of paper on United States Department headed note paper that says the minutes of the meeting, saying that should a unified Germany be allowed to join NATO, NATO would not take one inch further east. And of course, since then, 14 countries, most of them surrounding Russia, have all joined NATO. And of course, we had Angela Merkel turn around and said that the only reason they agreed to the Minsk agreements was to give them time to arm Ukraine against Russia. We made a terrible, terrible mistake in miscalculating just how strong-willed Putin would be. Putin's going nowhere. He's absolutely loved by his leaders. What you have to remember is the Russian people they see Putin not only as their political leader, but their spiritual leader as well. Everybody knows you fight much harder for a spiritual leader. There is the sign-up rate. They've got 1 million men in reserve. They've got more people. 30,000 people signing up every single month to join the Russian army. Would you, I would ask the people of Great Britain or the people under Biden or the people under Macron, would you sign up and go and fight for them? Don't think you would.
No. Well, I mean, it's interesting also that you bring up NATO, because I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the current negotiations going on between Russia and Ukraine is that Zelensky is willing to kind of give up what Putin has already conquered if he is allowed to become a member of NATO. Is that correct?
Okay. So let's unpack that. First of all, there are 8 oblasts that are in Ukraine that are primarily Russian speaking. Now, Victoria Nuland and the National Endowment for Democracy, when Yanukovych, the original president, did not want to take the IMF loan, and that's what kicked it all off. It was decided it was time for a regime change. Russia were not going to have that. So basically what happened then was Zelensky was installed. He won by 325 votes to nil, quite a resounding success. And of course, in the Ukraine Maidan, the EU and the UN asked the police to step down. Victoria Nuland was in the Maidan Square handing out cookies just before they went to storm the parliament and chase the government out of there. Now, that was the democratically elected government of Ukraine that they chased out of the building. And the same thing is happening in Georgia. We're seeing it over the last 5 nights of violence. where the EU are trying to get rid of the democratically elected by the people of Georgia government there. And here's the thing when it comes to this. When you look at NATO and how bad they are, and you look at all the promises that they've broken, time after time after time after time. And of course, NATO has expanded east. The Russians haven't come west. NATO has expanded east.
We've moved over 1,000 miles towards Russia, haven't we?
Yeah, and the trouble is, we keep saying, oh, well, it's a red line. We keep crossing Putin's red line and he doesn't do anything. If it wasn't for Putin, we'd already be in World War III. Could you imagine, for instance, if we went and Russia decided or China decided they were going to put rockets on Jersey or the Orkneys or the Isle of Wight, how we would respond? If it was on America, if they did it in Alaska, in Canada, or on Hawaii, we'd be in nuclear war already.
Yep. Well, there are a lot of people that think that we may be at war already, even though it hasn't been officially announced.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not being funny. We're in a proxy war. America keeps saying we're not at war with Russia. Yes, you are. You're just using Ukraine to do it.
Yep.
And the reason that there is a problem with that, we have documentation that shows in 1988, when a think tank actually sorted out what would happen in the war, Ukraine were to be the ones that would be the bulwark or the buffer, so that they could literally deny they were at war, but we'll keep supplying the weapons. And guess who the other country was to be if they actually fell? If the Ukrainians fell, do you know who the backup country was meant to be in this document? Georgia.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And of course, now we've got the Romanians, the so-called far-right candidate. The moment he became populist for Romania, immediately he took the lead. He became far-right in all the press. And of course, it looks as though the EU will have to interfere in that election as well to stop him becoming the president of Romania.
Wow. It's just insane how much interference we can have in another country's politics, how much interference they can have in ours.
Let me just jump in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
As the great man Voltaire once turned around and said, you live in a democracy until you disagree with it.
That's brilliant. I like that.
I've actually travelled to North Korea, a finer place.
Wow.
I mean, it is absolutely beautiful. I've got to say, and I went, and there was a BBC reporter on the same flight as I,
Oh, wow.
and he was followed everywhere because obviously they knew what he was there to do. Where I was pretty free to travel around, and it's clean, it's ordered, it's well-mannered, the people were lovely and warm and welcoming. I didn't feel I was under a dictator at any time during that time. And what you have to remember here is the problem is when you don't want to join, that's when there becomes a problem. When you don't want to join this society. When you look at all the people that are out there, you look at Xi Jinping. I mean, Baerbock literally turned up in China. Annalena Baerbock turned up in China yesterday and started lecturing them on the war in Ukraine. And China tend to be I was at the Chinese embassy a couple of days ago, and I was speaking to someone, and he said, we don't lecture anybody on the way they need to live their lives. We'll carry on our way, but we will not take any interference in ours. So, of course, Baerbock went there and started giving them loads of grief. And literally, now they've ruined relations between China and Germany. She's literally single-handedly destroyed it. And we have the same with this idiot Lammy, our foreign secretary,
goodness me.
David Lammy, who, let's face it, he thought that King Henry VII succeeded King Henry VIII. So, he's not the
on the chase was that?
Yeah.
Oh, that was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was it.
Mastermind. And he thought that Marie Antoinette won a Nobel Peace Prize for discovering radiation. I think the thing is, I actually tabled a motion. I actually sent Lammy a motion and turned around and said, can you please, in an email, can you please explain to me what evidence you have for North Korean troops being in Russia, being in Ukraine, or being in Kursk? I also sent the same thing to the United States State Department. I haven't had a reply from either of them. And the whole idea of there being North Korea, because you had to have a boogeyman for them to be able to release and have a reason to release the long-range missiles to then be fired into Russia. So
Well,
every single time they will step this up, and the next thing you'll see it's the Houthis, and then
yeah.
then there'll be Iranians in there and everything else. There always has to be another bogeyman for the West.
Yeah, and it's always just a fall guy for something bigger.
You only have to look. The BBC have their own disinformation unit run by Mariana Spring. Now, very simply, the truth doesn't need to be explained to people. You tell them what truth is, and of course, over time, that truth ekes out. You certainly don't need. The only reason you would need a disinformation, I would say, lobby, is to be able to turn around and say that the truth isn't the truth. You've got to try and cover it up, because the truth will out. The truth will always eke out. It's like a virus. It always gets out in the end. And the thing, I think, when you look at these people, you only have to ask yourself, when you ask if Putin's a dictator or Orban's a dictator or Xi Jinping's a dictator, do they have freedom of speech in there? Well, let's have a look at the West. If you say something that people that the main body of government disagree with, you are cancelled. You could lose your job. You could lose your livelihood. Do we have freedom of speech here? No, we don't. And secondly, if you remember the Labour Party, before they got elected, they had a meeting with military contractors and arms dealers. They were asked if they would make that meeting public. They did not do so. They received £500,000 from big pharma lobbyists before the election. Keir Starmer received £50,000 from Trevor Chin, from the Labour Friends of Israel.
Not even mentioning Lord Ali.
Yes, and there's Lord Ali's dresses, of course. There was that £50,000 towards his leadership bid. Then the Labour Party received from a South African businessman to do with the Labour Friends of Israel a £5 million donation.
Wow.
You're talking 40% of the Labour front bench have been on visits to Israel from the Labour Friends of Israel. You wonder why they can't call out a genocide. Now, I don't know about you, but I would say I'm not on Israel's side. I'm not on Hamas's side. I say very simply, if you kill a child in a war situation, if you kill civilians, if you kill children, you're a war criminal. It doesn't matter what flag you stand under.
Yeah, people need to stop playing the division game and stand on the side of humanity. And I think, that's one thing that Keir Starmer cannot do. Sorry,
we're talking about Starmer, aren't we? You're talking about a guy who went down on one knee for the BLM, which turned out to be one of the biggest scams going. Of course, all the BLM leaders buying various properties out in the middle of nowhere, out in these wonderful islands. And of course, when you look at Keir Starmer and the stances he takes, it's always the stance that's going to be the wokest.
Yeah.
It's always something that is, and it's always detrimental. And you only have to look at the farming lobby. Now, the 22 billion black hole that they said they found and the Conservatives had left. What you have to remember is 21 billion pounds of that, 21 billion pounds investment is going overseas for people to buy up farmland, including BlackRock, to buy up farmland in the UK, which are then going to make solar panels on 200 farms of over 200 acres apiece. Now, when you total up all the money that's being given by the Labour Labours to the green companies, totals 21.4 billion. Seems quite close to the 22 billion black hole.
Well, also everything that they're doing in the coal industry at the moment. Yeah, carry on.
And then you've only got to look at what they're doing with our milk. That is quite staggering.
Yeah.
And let's be honest here. 90 days they tested this drug on cattle for. 2 of those cattle, they tested it on 2 cattle. 1 of them died. And
really?
We have no idea why that cow died.
Wow, yes. That is I did not know that. That is
and that was
very
suppressed.
Terrifying. I wanted to go back and talk about the virtue signalling of the Labour government, particularly David Lammy.
Yes.
What do you think is the mindset of these people? Because all the people that have suffered from racial enslavement have been dead for a while. right? So it's just their ancestors, it's their descendants that are out trying to get these reparations. The people who actually went through the slavery and the people who actually had this trauma will not be getting any benefits from this reparation. And not only that, you don't need to look very far to know that it wasn't just black people that were enslaved. A lot of black people did the enslaving. A lot of white people were enslaved. Irish. I mean,
where the word Slav comes from. It was Eastern Europeans who first termed, because that's where the word slave comes from. It comes from the actual Slavs that were taken in slaves. Now, the other thing that you really need to or people need to focus on here. First of all, the Royal Navy had 5 or 6 ships that they would send out, and they would stop the slavery on these various islands and this, that, and the other. And of course, 2,000 sailors died doing that. Are we going to get reparations for those sailors? Can I have reparations from the Romans and the Vikings, please, for invading my country? And the other thing that you have to remember is when African tribes conquered each other, the conquering tribes would make money by leaving them in cages for the slavers on the beach.
Yep.
Okay. And very, very simply, quite often if the slave ships didn't come along, these people would die. Full stop.
Wow.
And the other thing that always made me very, very, first of all, you never were a slave. I never owned one, so I owe you nothing. And the second thing I would say here, isn't it wonderful that these people can go around pulling down statues and demanding reparations for things that happened 300, 400, 500, 600 years ago, whilst wearing their Nike trainers and their Apple watches that were made in sweatshops in China and Indonesia. Yes, I think the possibly the greatest idiocy I've ever seen was a young man. He was obviously as woke as you like. It was on the tube, and I actually berated him for it, and so did the woman of Caribbean ethnicity as well. She was a black woman, and he turned around and he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry for what we did. Please have my seat."
Oh,
and I turned around and said, "Are you offering that because did you do something to her as a woman and the fact that she's 50? Or did you do it because she's black?" He said, "Well, of course, because she's black." And at that point, the Caribbean woman just absolutely flew for him. I don't need handouts from white people. I am strong.
yeah.
I am independent. I can make my own life. And here's the thing. There is a very, very straightforward thing here. You never were a slave. I never owned one. Shut the hell up.
Yeah, simple as.
Let's put it this way for all the white woke liberals out there. Black people are perfectly okay of rising up themselves and fighting their way to the top without any help from you. And in fact, they would be absolutely mortified. If you want to help as a genuine person who wants to give somebody help, you want to help somebody because of their skin color. That is really, really about as racist as you can get.
Exactly.
I always tell it's like the trans lobby and the homophobic lobby and everything else. When people I sort of laugh at that now. When people turn around and say you're homophobic, I just turn around and say, well, I've never been frightened to go home, and they get really, really angry.
That's hilarious.
Or, somebody says you're a transphobe, and you go, I've never been frightened to go on public transport. And just play completely thick.
I've been called homophobic because I don't think that it should be taught to 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds.
Here's the thing with all this LGBTQ nonsense in the schools at certain age. They turn around and say, if a child is trans, they'll know it at the age of 6. That is nonsense.
No, it's absolute
nonsense. I'll tell
nonsense.
you for why, and there's one argument that blows that completely out of the water. The age of 6, these children still think there's a Santa Claus.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
End of story.
Yeah.
Children are incredibly malleable.
Yeah.
How do you think we learn as children? We learn from our parents. We learn from the things we see around us and everything else, and we soak all that in. We're like little sponges when they're, that age. So if you tell them that they are, that the reason they're feeling slightly strange today is because they want to be a different sex, they will believe it, the same as they'll believe in the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So leave them the hell alone. It's very, very straight.
Insane. I suppose since going back to, because we went down a bit of a rabbit hole with the gender, so honestly I could talk about that stuff for hours. Honestly,
Yes,
I really,
so
really
could.
could.
Not a problem.
But going back to current conflicts that are going on at the moment, with the, I suppose, the threat of World War Three, on the rise, or perhaps already going on, what do you think our chances are?
Okay, let me, as a military analyst, and literally I've done this for years and years and years. Let me put everybody at ease. First of all, there is not going to be a nuclear war, and there's one simple reason. It's not because cooler heads prevail or anything else. The military-industrial complex would have nobody to sell their weapons to, because everybody would be dead, and the military-industrial complex is incredible. It's trillions and trillions of dollars every year. Just in America alone, it literally employs 2 million people, and it's responsible for $27 trillion worth of business.
Wow.
They are not going to kill that, so they're not going to kill everybody. Conventional wars, yes, there's a very good chance of that. They'd like to trigger, certainly Zelensky is as crazy as bedbug. Now, what we've got is a problem, because the Azov are literally formed from the days of Stepan Bandera, so they are of a Nazi ideology, and we seem to be okay getting in bed with Nazis or Nazi ideology when it suits us.
Yeah.
And of course, the Azov battalion and the Banderites and literally the people that are running Ukraine at the moment are exactly that. And what really is quite funny is when you look and you see somebody with a Ukraine flag in their bio as well as an Israel one. So you've got a neo-Nazi ideology there, and you've got supposedly a Jewish ideology there. I've never quite understood.
Quite contradicting.
Yes, I always ask them, could you please explain that to me? And it's always, you always just get a two-fingered salute as if to go away.
Well, I mean, it's like this gays for Gaza thing. I think it's just another way of saying chickens for KFC.
See how you get on. Yes, exactly that. And it's one of those. I believe in toleration without indoctrination.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's a perfect way of encapsulating it, I think.
Yeah, you are tolerant of whatever anybody wants to do. If they want to do it in the comfort of their own home, that's absolutely fine. If you want to pray to whichever, what you can't do is you can't bring your ideologies. And this is the thing that's always troubled me about immigration. There are 580 million people in the world that literally exist on less than £2 a day, so that we know that the poverty problem is there. Now, they multiply at 40 million a year. So how does even taking 1 million a year and dropping them into another country solve the problem?
Yeah.
It doesn't. How about you stop mass immigration, you raise their standard of living in their country so that it becomes level with yours? But we don't want to do that, do we?
And we've lost the sense of working hard.
This is the thing, you see, because people spend so much time being offended, they don't spend their time using their brains. Now, there was a couple of programs that people would always turn around and say are racist. There was an old 70s program called Love Thy Neighbour, which, he used to call a white guy and a black guy used to live next door to each other. And of course, we had Al Garnett and everything else. But what was always showed in these programs was that the black guy would always win over the white guy because the white guy was just a small-minded bigot.
And what colour is sin?
Don't tell me, but I've got a feeling it's going to be black.
Of course it is. And his soul was black with sin. You're even black on the outside. God knows what you're like on the inside.
But what these programs would actually do when people went, oh, they're racist, so we go, no, what they were doing was laughing at racism. Blazing Saddles, the film was laughing at racism, and showing how small-minded and petty these people were. And of course, what they did was they then banned that. They banned any reference to anything that actually sometimes comedy can show the racism in people in a way that makes it positive for the people who are being racially discriminated against, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah.
And it is really, really sad that we try and rewrite history. History's there to learn from, so we don't make the same mistakes again.
Yeah.
It really is. And if you wipe away that history, then we're doomed, aren't we, to just keep repeating the same mistakes?
Well, we all know what the definition of insanity is. Personally, I would define it with the current government, but most people might not.
Yes,
Oh, well, I mean, we've covered a wide array of subjects. I'm sure there's many more to talk about. Is there anything specific that you'd like to cover?
Yeah, there is something specific. I was very, very, and of course, a lot of people won't know this. I was at the Chinese embassy a couple of days ago, sorry. And very, very simply, we were there to have a look at a trade negotiation, or should we say a trade package for drones. And this is where war is going.
Right. Okay.
I would say if anybody is out there that is thinking of joining the military, please don't. Warfare has completely moved on. The demonstration I saw, the Chinese embassy, of the drone warfare, or the drones that are available for warfare that are coming up, is absolutely staggering. They could put 75,000 of these drones up in no time at all. They can all fly in patterns. They even had a demonstration where drones were going in and out of a bamboo forest to find a trench and then go in and blow it up.
Wow.
The drone warfare that is coming our way, whether that be the high altitude drones that can strike with nuclear packages or strike with very high explosive packages, or the swarm drones that can literally come and literally be used on the front line. Very, very cheap, very, very inexpensive. Artillery, men and tanks are of the past now. They really are. And if you're thinking about signing up and going to fight the good fight and everything else, please don't.
Do you think
you will not survive very long on the front line at all?
It wasn't too long ago that people were criticising Rishi Sunak for his possible opinions and future conscription. Do you think that there's still a risk of that, even though war has moved on?
Yes, absolutely, because we've lost in the armed forces, we've lost 5.3% of the army have put in their papers and want to leave. We're talking 3.7% of the RAF, and we're talking 7.2% of the Royal Navy over the last 2 years. So there's definitely a drive to get people into the armed forces, because the armed forces, having been cold for many, many years and have not kept up with the technological developments that have gone on. China, Russia's technological development is light years ahead of ours. And of course, we're saying it would take 10, 20 years to catch up. In essence, you don't really catch up, because they're not going to be standing still. They're going to be moving forward all the time. So we're about 10 years, we're a good 10 years behind Russia and China in the development of the right things to fight on a battlefield. They've got missiles that travel at Mach 10 now. And can obviously, you're talking 3 kilometers per second. So if you go and sail an aircraft carrier into their waters, one of those into your flight deck, you're not flying any planes off. And if you've got no air cover, you're in all sorts of trouble. So yes, I would turn around and say that the British military does need revamping, but it needs revamping in a smart and modern way. But getting more men to go and jump into tanks and serve on aircraft carriers won't.
That was going to be my last question, but that's just made me think of something else. In China, I believe it is, they are having massive boosts forward in the world of AI and robotics and everything like that. What role do you think that perhaps artificial soldiers or artificial intelligence of any kind, robotics of any kind, could play in an upcoming war?
It's a long way off before we have soldiers on the front line, but let me say this. First of all, scientific research. The moment you do scientific research, it comes with a wonderful thing. Scientists always go, oh, I want to invent this and I want to do that. The military will take it over straight away.
Yep.
As soon as it's ready for use, the military will grab hold of it. That's just a fact of life. And you can't really stop it unless you have unbelievably stringent rules. Secondly, AI, you do have to be very, very careful because the Americans had an AI drone. And basically what they did was they gave it a set parameter, go and attack this target, and the drone would be awarded points if it completed its mission. So it would go and attack this target and it gets 3 points, 4 points, depending on how difficult the mission was. This was an AI drone, so it was self-learning all the time. After a while, what they do is give it commands saying, don't attack this place, but attack that place. So the drone would then work it out that the person that was controlling it was denying it points that it could have had. And then it turned around and attacked its drone operator and actually attacked the control tower that the drone operator was sitting in because it was stopping it from doing what it needed to do to achieve its maximum capability. Yeah. So be very, very careful when you talk about AI.
Wow. Okay. Well, we might be going some very dark places in the future then I mean, war is always gloomy, but that kind of gives it a very dystopian aspect, I think.
It does. I'd leave AI alone and let you know what to do.
Yeah, avoid it like the plague at the moment, I think.
Yes.
Well, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. I think, like I said earlier, we've covered a lot of subjects. I mean, a lot of this stuff I could talk about for hours, but it's been absolutely lovely kind of meeting you over Zoom, I suppose. But yeah, it's been absolutely great. Thank you for coming on.
You're more than welcome. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much to all your listeners for listening to me ramble on for last.
For more exclusive behind-the-scenes content, please be sure to subscribe to our Patreon. It really helps us cover the cost of any live streams, events, protests, or anything that we do. You'll also be seeing any behind-the-scenes footage and anything that we might be doing with Defiance Records.
Resistance GB's new series, 1,000 Words, has me, portrait artist Jake Fern, talking to some of the key figures in the movement. Half my brain concentrating on having a conversation, and the other half on making a painting. Do I succeed at either? You be the judge.